Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. Today, I have a non-evolutionary astrologer here with us, but he needs very little introduction. He's a fan favorite. He is Mr. Christopher Renstrom, who you know from Christopher Renstrom Astrology on his YouTube channel. He has several books that he's written, and I'm going to link all of that below. But also, I'm going to talk in a little bit about his new salon. So anyway, welcome, Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so grateful when you say yes to coming back on. So today,
Oh.
what we're going to be talking about, and I have a little list and I've got to get it out. Where did my little list go? And so, oh, it fell on the floor. Please hold.
Well, list is recovered.
The list has been recovered. Okay. So this list is about all of the planets that are going backwards in the sky that are going to mean that we have to revisit some things that we thought we were done with, but we
Right.
were not done with. So we've got Saturn, we've got Neptune, and we have Uranus, all going back into the places they were several months ago. Okay, so we got this little nice dip of like what's to come, but it was just a preview. So
Mm-hmm.
now we're going to kind of take them one by one because this has to do with what's coming up in September and beyond. So September is kind of a big month, right?
Yeah, two eclipses and Uranus turning retrograde and Saturn retrograding back down into Pisces, to say the least.
To say the least. And so, if you're like, I don't know what all of that means,
Right.
let's kind of break a couple things down for you. We are going to be doing a bunch of things on the eclipses, but can when we started talking, you were sort of talking about Saturn and Virgo role in the second eclipse, the lunar eclipse. Do you
Right.
want to talk a little bit about that to kick us off?
Well, the second eclipse is a solar eclipse of the month. The first eclipse
Did
is,
I say lunar? I meant solar.
I know. It's like it's the other luminary. I don't know. Did you ever take aerobics class and you'd mess up and they'd be like, your other left foot? It's like your other luminary. But yes, the second eclipse of the month is the solar eclipse, which will be taking place at the last degree of Virgo, which is referred to as the anaretic degree. And so it takes place right at 29 degrees Virgo, and it will be opposite retrograde Saturn at 29 degrees Pisces. Like, like we didn't we didn't pile on enough Rococo astrological references. Now we have to like go and do that. But what it basically means is that when you have an eclipse right at the end degree, it's very critical. It's very, very powerful. Planets are most powerful when they enter a sign, and they're most powerful when they leave a sign. It's like people entering a party and people leaving the party, maybe with the person they showed up with, or maybe not with the person that they showed up with. So that's basically what happens at these different degrees. And so what happens is that when you've got Saturn opposite that eclipse in Virgo at the 29th degree, it's sort of drawing a line of summation. It's bringing things to an end. And so, what it's really about is what is your relationship to a deadline, which is essentially what's going on here. Another way to think of it is last call at a bar. It's just like, last call. So you've got like one last chance to have a drink or one last chance to sort of like hook up with that person who's looking good. And meanwhile, the staff is getting ready for Libra. They're like dumping the ashtrays and whatever. And they're like, we're moving on. We're moving on to the next sign, which is Libra. And so what this can do is cause a sort of anxiety of basically the big question to be asking of situations is, do I stay or do I go? Do I stay with a situation, a relationship, an association that I'm dealing with right now, or is it time to finally say goodbye and to move on? And both can be um, moments, both can be anxiety provoking. Am I staying because I've resigned myself to this, or am I staying because I've committed myself to this? Am I going reluctantly? Am I going because I want to go? And there's no going back with this eclipse. The decision you make is a final decision and one that you're going to be living with. So it's a very powerful, powerful eclipse, in my opinion.
Yeah, Virgo has a lot to do with judgment and discernment.
Hmm.
And Pisces has a lot to do with imagination and vision.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, talk to me a little bit about how people can sort of navigate those two, which is one is much more like in the body and realistic and action orient, not action orient so much as like practical. That's the word.
Yeah.
Versus
Well,
like,
yeah,
where can I go?
right. What I find kind of interesting about it is both of their relationships to ending. Okay.
Okay.
Virgos don't like ending. Okay, they have their to-do list and they check off all the items on their to-do list and they look forward to tomorrow when they have a new to-do list. Okay, so Virgo is more a work in progress or more working on something, but the idea of completing and ending something can kind of make Virgos very anxious. I've seen a number of Virgos actually, let's say they clean up a room and everything's been well ordered in the room, and they're faced with now you can leave and go on to something else. Many of them, metaphorically speaking, will go and mess up that room again because that's what they know. That's what they're familiar with. They're familiar with those problems, they're familiar with those issues, and that's almost kind of like a comfort zone. The idea of like, well, you're leaving this and moving on to something else. They're like, well, what is this something else? And how's that organized? And that's like, and so there can be a reluctance to leave or to end with Virgo. Pisces, because it's the last sign of the zodiac, they're like, oh yeah, it's over. It's just like, Pisces, I sometimes would joke is the apocalyptic sign of the zodiac because it's the last one. It's like, this world is evil and soiled and spoiled and ruined and all these things. We're just gonna like flood it, like Noah's Ark, just like flood it. It's over. Get rid of it. And I'm on to a brave new world, or I'm on to something new and something different. So the two of them have two very different relationships to ending. Virgo will work with whatever they have, even if it's the last thread and a needle and, and they're trying to like make a knot. Okay, they'll work with whatever it is. Whereas Pisces is kind of like, let's just get rid of all of this. Let's just destroy and get rid of all of this. Not because they're nihilistic, but because we can start afresh. We can flood the earth, and then we can find Mount Arafat, and there will be a dove with an olive branch in its beak, and we can start over again. So they're two very different impulses and two very different relationships to ending or concluding something.
So this is why, if you have any interest in learning astrology from Christopher Renstrom, or if you just that really resonates with you, because as a Virgo moon, I can tell you I am the queen of making lists. And my husband is he will constantly say your to-do list never ends. Like, because as soon as you get through it, there's like five more things added. And I don't know that I've ever thought of it in that way, that it has to do with kind of reluctance for endings, because then there is this sitting with like your stuff. You have to kind of sit with like stuff. So
Your
Christopher
blank pad.
Right, the blank pad, which is very uncomfortable. Like, I mean, TMI, but like I file every single one of my emails. And like the other day, I realized I only had, and people, please don't hate me for this. I only had one email in my inbox. And I was like, when does that ever happen? That, like that is like the most anal person in the world. But
No, it's amazing. I have so much admiration. My inbox is a Sisyphus. It's like the boulder that keeps rolling back down to the bottom of the hill again.
well, no, I mean, you have to understand now it's already up to, 15 or 20. But the point being like that I thought that I would never get to that point. And then when I did, I almost didn't know what to do with myself.
Right.
So, and there's some workaholic tendencies. Anyway, point being, this is not a therapy session for me, even though I'm turning it into one. The point being that if you like that kind of thing, please think about joining Christopher Renstrom's astrology salon, because they do like tell them about what you're doing in this. Because if you're not familiar, a salon is a gathering of intellectuals.
Mhm.
And so tell them a little bit about your salon.
Well, salons actually come out of France and they were run by women.
Ooh, we like that.
Yeah, and so it was women who would invite Voltaire or some dignitary or an intellectual or an actress or something like that to the salon and to discuss topics of the day or things like that. So I just sort of like brought it up to modern times. And what we do is that the Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon is actually two parts. One is for $5 a month, you can subscribe to a lesson, which is pre-recorded and will be discussed in the salon. The salon is a live event, but you can get it on a replay. That's $10 a month. And there we will discuss the lesson. We always do a mystery chart, which is we scrub the name and the birth information off the person. And I work with my co-host Emily. She'll either present me with a mystery chart or I present her with a mystery chart. Okay, and then the other person, it's not really guessing who it is, but actually going through the chart and reading it. And what we do when we do the big reveal is see what was read, how it compares to who the person is, the identity of the person themselves. And everyone gets to participate in all of that. And they're like, they'll be like, this is what I think that Venus is doing, or that, they'll type on in. And then we will round it up with something in which everyone has voted on an upcoming aspect that they want to discuss. And so we'll do that, and then we'll take questions about your own personal charts. This is something that I always wanted to do, but YouTube, if it's not a subscription base, it's too open, and if people are going to ask a question about their chart, that's a private thing and it needs to be intimate. It needs to be one-on-one. And so, we'll all address that or talk about that or something like that. So it's really, really delightful. It's something I've really wanted to do for a long time.
That's amazing. It's very inspirational. And I guess I wanted to bring it up now because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the sort of like insight that you can get, just every little tidbit. You have a way of describing the astrology that's very unique to you, in my opinion, that, it's different than what you hear from other astrologers. And I really appreciate that creativity and also those kind of really deep, wise insights. So I'm a
So,
big fan.
oh,
So we were just talking about the apocalyptic nature of Pisces.
I see. It's right.
So on September 1st,
That doesn't mean that we're having an apocalypse on September 1st.
no, we're not having an apocalypse, even though but there might be some apocalyptic thinking returning. The people who are of that ilk who want to push that narrative might be, coming back into a position of power. So let's talk just first a little bit about what, September 1st, Saturn is in Aries now.
Okay.
I personally feel like there's been some refreshment, like, kind of an optimism returning in some ways. Doesn't feel like an optimistic time, don't get me wrong, but like a strength, maybe is what I should say.
Right.
Um, and Saturn in Pisces was somewhat of a drain, I felt like, for a lot of people. So here we're entering it again. Talk about why you feel like, all right, this is a big question, but
Mhm.
I just said how wise you are. So you get to be put on
Ah,
this.
I'm on the spot.
So the planets, they go retrograde and they go forward. So we get a little taste of something, but then we have to go back and we have to deal with the old energy. From
Right.
a bigger picture standpoint, what do you think that's about?
I
Like,
think, yeah, well, first of all, there's a difference between a planet turning retrograde and a planet retrograding into a previous sign. That's a very big difference, okay? Because when a planet reverses its direction in the sky, which is what a retrograde is, it doesn't actually reverse its direction in the sky. If it did, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. But from the apparent motion based on different speeds of orbits, the planet looks like it's moving backwards in the sky. Um, it is a revisit, it is a retreading, it's going back over the ground again. And particularly in the society that we live in right now, it's kind of like, I have to go back over that again. Forget it. I want to go forward, and it's just, we don't really, we don't always have a very positive or constructive relationship to revisiting. But revisiting is actually a really good thing because you might have overlooked a lot of things when you were racing on through the first time that the planet was passing through. So when it retrogrades back down into previous sign, there's kind of this idea of unfinished business, and revisiting that unfinished business. But what actually comes to mind to me with Saturn retrograding back down into Pisces, which is the last of the zodiac signs. Why is Pisces the last of the zodiac signs? Because the zodiac signs are based on the agricultural year here in the northern hemisphere. The agricultural year begins with Aries, the spring equinox, and it will end with Pisces, which is the end of the agricultural year. All right. So with Saturn sort of going back in to Pisces, it reminds me of that book that was written by another child of Saturn, although he was born under Aquarius and not Capricorn, but it's very much a Capricorn themed book, and that's A Christmas Carol. And in A Christmas Carol, Scrooge, who is, everyone's pretty much familiar with Scrooge, a miserly, really misbegotten and miserable sort of old man, is visited by three spirits, three ghosts. There's the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. What the Saturn going back into Pisces reminds me of is the ghost of Christmas past. Okay. The mission of the ghost, by the way, is to do a wake-up call, is to open up Scrooge's heart and soul and make him a generous person instead of, what has become encrusted over his life. But the ghost of Christmas past is the first ghost, and she takes him back to his childhood, where you see a very fantasizing Scrooge. He's reading 1001 Arabian Nights. He's alone at school waiting for his family to come pick him up, and he's reading 1001 Arabian Nights. And he has this imagination, and he has this love of life and of literature. And as we go through the past, we see that he actually was very fresh as a child, very lively, very imaginative, a good person. But what begins to happen is that we see the opportunities that were missed or the choices that were made that were not good choices. And basically, he's driven by very Saturnian ideas, which is fear of rejection and anxiety around money. And these begin as sort of like seeds, which we see in his travel to the past that grow into who he's going to become and why. And so with Saturn kind of going back to Pisces again, it's kind of like we're all getting a visit from the ghost of Christmas past. We may hear about people in our lives, we may even hear from people in our lives, and we may be reminded of, why we didn't like that person, but then we may also question, why do we not like that person? What did that person take something away? And, was that done at a time in our life where that really hurt? But do we still have those feelings about something having been taken away from who we are right now? So that's kind of what this Saturn is going to do. It's going to take us back and we're going to examine opportunities that didn't work out. And was that a good thing or a bad thing? Sometimes opportunities not working out is good. And so I think that that's what Saturn is going to do by going back into the previous sign that ended a major chunk of time there, which I really attribute to Neptune having been the 14 years that Neptune was in Pisces.
That's a really powerful image that we can all kind of carry away with us, because I mean, of course, we've all seen 500 versions of Scrooge,
Right.
and we all do know that, like, kind of that sad part, where he's like left alone at the boarding school.
Mhm.
And but then it's still the past when he makes additional choices, like he works too hard, and so he doesn't, his wife is, his love of his life doesn't work out, and things like that.
Because of a money choice.
Money, choosing money.
But you also see a benevolent side of him, which is the Fizzlerig, I think is the name or whatever, Fuzzywig, something. But his boss, stops everyone working and does a celebration and a Christmas dance. So not everything was dark and bad. And so there were choices that were made that were not made, like the love of his life, and he rejects her out of money. She doesn't have the position she once had. But then you also see him being moved and dancing, and that's going to come later. So when we go to the past, it's not just in a funereal shroud of a past that doesn't exist anymore. There's the things that we're reminded of, the things that made us smile or enlivened us. So it's not just a visit to the island of regret. And I think that Saturn retrograding back into Pisces particularly moves the memory, it moves the imagination. And as we all know, the element of water is in charge of memory and imagination.
And on a collective level, at least here in this country, especially, I wouldn't say it's not happening elsewhere, but especially in the US, the Saturn moving into Aries has had, a very new, fresh energy, but it's also, brought with it, bolder, faster militarization. There is kind of an interesting interplay between when Saturn was in Pisces before versus
Mhm.
when Saturn's going to go into Pisces now, where we've had this glimpse of the future. We've seen, just the stripping and cutting away of things like USAID and things like that, like really just sort of cutting things down to the bare minimum,
Mhm.
which is not necessarily that return, that nostalgic return to what people were hoping for.
Mhm.
And so on a collective level, it'll be interesting to see this revisitation and the opportunities that people have to kind of get in touch with, I think, the higher version of Saturn and Pisces, which is, responsibility to compassion and the arts, and for a vision where there is peace and harmony versus the militarization.
Well, and it's also, I mean, if you're going to look at Saturn and the Jupiter ruled signs, mid-teens it was in Sagittarius. That was the whole fear of the foreigner and immigration in Europe, where there were all the immigrants coming up into the European countries, and there was a whole, and then now with Saturn and Pisces over the last 2 years, that whole uh, broad brushstroke again of the immigrant as the foreigner or the invader or something like that. And the reason why I bring up immigration particularly is because these are two Jupiter ruled signs. Sagittarius, I think the Saturn transit in Sagittarius was maybe between about 2015, 2017, around that period of time. And that was the big, and the Pope made a point of welcoming immigrants into the Vatican. And then, the Saturn and Pisces, these are two Jupiter ruled signs. Jupiter is the planet of hospitality. It's Xenia, it's guest friendship, it's welcoming the stranger to your table and feeding them and making them feel welcome in your home. And so it's interesting that with Saturn, which can be a planet tied up with fears and anxieties, having been in both Sagittarius 2015, 2017, and then 2023 to now, that fear of the other, the immigrant, the foreigner, and what that is saying about the native, and it challenges people in their beliefs, in their spirituality, in their moral compass, in their humanity, their feeling of towards another person. And Saturn does test those things. It will test the elements of the sign that it's traveling through, and so those are also themes that are going to be brought up, and especially when you think of the solar eclipse in Virgo, which is pretty much modeled on Ceres, okay? And Ceres in the Roman mythology was the goddess of the plebs, the protector of the workers. You see how much the theme of workers is coming up. So that's, themes that are coming up that are going to be connected to the Saturn and Pisces, especially Saturn and Pisces opposite the solar eclipse in Virgo.
Thank you. Yeah, that is all very. So, anything else you want to say about that before we move on to the next one that's going backwards into a new sign, which would be Neptune? Anything more on the Saturn that you want to touch base on?
That to remember that it's not Saturn's job isn't to intimidate. and to make you afraid. Saturn addresses fear and anxiety, okay, and helps you to understand it. And the answer to fear and anxiety isn't, I'm going to be bold and brave and outshout it. The answer to fear and anxiety is actually embracing those fears and anxieties and asking them what they have to contribute to your life. Saturn at the end of the day is, I mean, I think it's many things at the end of every day. But anyway, but I think Saturn has a job to do psychologically in our lives, and that's to be the defense mechanism. It stands on the border because it's going to defend us from something that we're afraid of. But sometimes we outgrow our defense mechanisms. And that's one of the conversations we can have with Saturn traveling back down into the zodiac sign of Pisces.
So I love the idea that we do have an opportunity to make some changes now in a way that I think people have felt somewhat helpless.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe not everyone, but and even in our personal lives, like I know so many people's personal lives have felt a little out of control, have been like just everything just seems to be coming in at people all at once, and a lot of a dynamic universe. We're in a very change
Right.
oriented time. And so it's almost like looking at this time as an opportunity to go back and settle and make some choices because things will start moving forward again in the spring.
Yeah, absolutely. And you always have to remember that this time is your time because you're living in it. Okay, so
We picked it somehow, some way.
until we come up with time travel, this time is your time because you're living in it.
Interesting times. Okay, so we have Neptune then. So Neptune is the next one. It's already retrograde currently,
Right,
and it will be going back into the sign of Pisces on October 22nd. Now it's
right,
going to spend a shorter amount of time there because it'll move forward in January, late January.
right,
But late October, we are going to start to see Neptune going back into Pisces. So
right.
let's talk about that shift going from Neptune and Aries back into Neptune and Pisces.
To me, Neptune mythologizes whatever zodiac sign it's moving through. You know, it if you're familiar with Harry Potter, the whole idea of glamoring someone, it's not, you don't hypnotize, like you can glamour and appear as something more beautiful and beauteous than it really is, okay? Which is where we kind of get that illusion disillusionment thing with Neptune. Neptune glamorizes, it mythologizes whatever zodiac sign it's going through. And one of the things that Neptune was doing when it was traveling through Pisces was that it was glamorizing and mythologizing apocalyptic fantasies. Okay. And we have to remember that when you go and look in early Christianity and even before apocalypses were a dime a dozen. There's an apocalypse by Adam in the Gnostic Gospels. There's St. John the Divine, with the apocalypse. Apocalypses were a dime a dozen, and they were basically the revenge fantasies of slaves and conquered people, is what apocalypses were. They were like, I'm living in a horrible world where I've been, enslaved, trodden upon, I've lost my kingdom, I've lost my family. This is horrible, terrible, awful things have been done to me. But you know what? There's going to be a new world because this god or goddess or this Christ or whatever is going to come back and they're going to punish all the evil people who are rich and gluttonous and have done horrible things. They're going to punish them all and they're going to raise, those who have been downtrodden up into the heavenly skies and will leave this sin-infested, horrible world and will go live in heaven, which was kind of the Western version, but there've been different versions of this. And so apocalypses are basically revenge fantasies, because I've been harmed and victimized and there's been a lot of there is a lot of harm and there is a lot of victimization that goes on and we're way past like, oh, you're being a victim. We're watching on television like horrible atrocities that are taking place. And so that this is what fostered apocalyptic imagination, which is common theme. It runs through so many mythologies and religions and things like that. It's part pessimistic. This world can never be a good world, or people can never be good to one another. And it's part optimistic, which is I'm looking towards a time when everything will be wiped clean, and we'll come into what we truly are, which is something which is very, very beautiful. So there was a lot of that was going on with Neptune traveling through Pisces. I think nowadays one of the remnants of that is what's it called? Doom scroll, where people, scroll through headlines looking for gloom and doom and the end of the world and things like that, and this feeling of like, well, we have to get, and it's a relationship to, we have to get rid of the old and embrace the new because the old keeps following us around like toilet paper stuck to your shoe at a restaurant or something like that, just keeps lingering. And the thing is, no, the old is the soil that you grew out of. Okay. And it's the soil that you're going to return to, as long as planet Earth is still in existence. And so, with Neptune moving back in, you can have something like an apocalyptic pessimism, or Neptune is also a planet of vision. I have a vision of something better, or I have a vision of something good, and that's the difference between Neptune and the moon. The moon is a dream. You go to sleep at night and you have dreams, and maybe you wake up in the morning and try to figure them out, whereas Neptune is a vision of the way that the world should be. You know, a good example of that would be Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream. He wasn't talking about the dream he had the night before. He has a dream of what the world could be, and people sign on for that dream. But those dreams come in different guises, they come in different contexts. And so, with Neptune going back down into Pisces, that a sign that it rules. And the last time it was in Pisces, you had, I think they called it the the Spring Revolution or whatever, the 1840s in Europe, where there were these spontaneous revolutions, which kind of corresponded with the Arab Spring that we experienced at the time that Neptune moved into. There's this feeling of like, you can get rid of the old world and you can enter into a new one, which was very prominent was Neptune was in Capricorn, and there was the collapse of the Soviet Union and all these sorts of things. But or maybe that was a little later, but there's this idea of get rid of the old and enter into something new, but the old gives life to the new. There's a wonderful phrase on my classical station here in Salt Lake City. They'll do a little tidbit about music, and they'll say, all what's old was once new. In other words, you're listening to classical music and it's like whatever, but at the time it came out, it might have been very radical or different, or it was new and it was fresh. And so we have a reminder of this with Neptune going back down into Pisces. And I think Neptune back down in Pisces is going to raise those questions that were raised during the period of time that Neptune was in Pisces, where governments were changing, people's feeling in society was changing. There was and it was very powerful. So it will dip its toe back into that and move back into this one, because we all know that there's a very strong vision right now of the way the world, or at least America, is supposed to be, and it's very Aries. It's got a very militant flavor to it, and it's not the Piscean flavor at all. And so sometimes we need to stand with a foot in both worlds to really understand what's being lost and what's being gained. And maybe we would be gaining something at the loss of something. And so we need to be standing with that split vision, that duality, as we often like to say. And we need to hold that duality within our conscience.
So I recently did a talk about AI,
Mm,
and also a lot of the founders and the tech bros that are really supportive of this. And in my research, of their charts and things like that. But one of the things that was really strong during this time was their apocalyptic fantasies. Like they are
Really?
people who, like Sam Altman has, like Israeli gas masks and like a bunker in 5 locations. And so that became like Peter Thiel
I
has like
didn't know that.
a
Wow.
survivor bunker in New Zealand. And so all of these, and it's really I'll put a plug in for the Nerd Reich, which if you are interested in this sort of tech bro AI extremism, which is really very powerful and something with Pluto and Aquarius, we all should be paying attention. There's a channel called the Nerd Reich that I love that really talks a lot about this stuff.
Right.
And he's a very well respected journalist and publishes books and stuff. So he's just got a interesting YouTube channel that I like. But I kept, kind of hearkening back to the fact that AI, like all these kind of dooming AI fantasies about the robots taking over, and this stuff was launched with Neptune and Pisces, and so there's just kind of an interesting reckoning too, because there was a very strong rise. I think there was a rise of a lot of positive. But as we were saying goodbye to Neptune and Pisces, I was, reflecting on a lot of the negativity and the victimization of people that maybe aren't necessarily traditionally victims, or just like an over victimization,
We're claiming victimization.
right? Claiming victimization.
Like,
Like,
like I'm oppressing you, but because I'm a victim, no one understands me, and it was just, I mean, I never saw so many competitive victimizations
but like
going
when did that become like when did become
a thing,
right,
which
like
is
why did
Neptune.
wanting to be a victim be a good thing, right? Like
We're
always
claiming
be angry
victim.
about something, no matter who you are, what side of the spectrum you're on.
Right, right.
And then it's interesting, like as Neptune has been in Aries, I've started to see more and more of this, like, what are you whining about, tech bro? Or what are you whining about, insert whiner here? You know what I mean? um
Well, the slogan of Aries, I want
Neptune.
winners, not whiners. So
Oh,
Aries is like zero tolerance for whining. Okay. It's like because it's Mars ruled. You
right.
don't broadcast your weaknesses because if you do, you've moved from the predator column to the prey column. So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
So
And
moving back
a
into
lot of
that,
that robust and athletic and male and all that stuff is coming out with the Neptune. And I call it male cosplay. Neptune
yeah,
series.
absolutely.
We're
Absolutely. We're seeing that.
men
And
pretending to be men.
yeah,
It's hyper virility type of thing. And it's like, really?
right. And really the higher expression of masculinity is not putting down women or not putting down, you like taking responsibility for yourself and your actions and what's happening. And this doesn't mean that there aren't terrible things happening and that there isn't a crisis going on multiple levels for lots of people. So again, I'm not trying to demonize anyone, but I guess I liked that you said that there's this duality where we got to see how the victimization you need to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You just got to, like, stop blaming other people because this is what's happening. And now
Right.
we get an opportunity to sort of revisit it and not necessarily have these apocalyptic victim fantasies where we come out on top. The healthier expression is to kind of root yourself in what you want and a positive vision, because you, like you said, that was the apocalyptic was very pessimistic
And angry.
and angry.
It was hopeless and and it was angry. And also, I mean, there's a lot of talk about what Christianity, there has been for a long time, but right now it's very much in the news or whatever. And it's like, what happened to um, feeding the stranger, helping out the poor, giving consolation to the sick? These were the principles, these were the virtues of Christianity, not stamping out people and taking their things and that's the complete opposite. And it came from the knowledge that that kind of compassion is a strength. It's very, very powerful. It reminds me of I've been reading the autobiography, or I just finished the autobiography of Coretta Scott King. I went from King, which is I think written by Jonathan Eig, to her autobiography. I was so um, really intrigued by her, and she has a very strong Mars in her chart. It's at the top of her chart, and one of the hardest things for her to get her mind around, and she would have conversations with her husband Martin, was she would say to Martin Luther King Jr., she'd say, I can be a pacifist. I don't know if I can be nonviolent. That's the thing that's hard. Because when someone comes at you with an upraised fist, or when someone's coming in, they're going to take things, or when someone's blaming you for your own misfortunes, you want to retaliate. And so if you think about the supreme strength and resolve it takes to not retaliate. I mean, if you want to see a true Mars strength, that's it, you know, to not let the horses gallop away with your chariot and pulling you along with it, but to practice restraint and to set yourself up in search of being a better person. And that search for being a better person, inspiring other people to be better people in a better society, not based on debasing people, but on celebrating people and raising up people. And, so these are themes that we're really seeing as the waters of Pisces and Aries mix, with Neptune going back and forth between these two zodiac signs.
Beginnings, endings, beginnings, and what do we want in this stew? So I think that this is a really good time with Saturn still being in Pisces. They're going to be joining up again in the spring, right at that 0 degrees, and that's going to be a very powerful, important time. And so it almost is incumbent upon all of us to envision, to have faith in a more beautiful version of the world. It's like this is the time that we have to do our personal work to find that compassion. Otherwise, it's on.
Compassion is a strength,
Mhm.
and forgiveness is a tall order.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why, you know. There's a reason why forgiveness is a tall order,
Yeah.
because it's something we reach towards, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
It's
this is a time for people to understand that the doom scrolling is not the answer. The zombie movies or the real true crime, escape fantasy stuff is like it's about addressing trauma, not kind of looking at it in fear and paralyzation, which is a very negative Pisces expression. And, it's not building a bunker in New Zealand and thinking that somehow when the end of the world comes, you're still going to have, servants that are going to fly you there. I mean, why would they do that? Like,
right.
like, wouldn't they just, off you and then go take your bunker? Like, I don't know.
Right. That's what they do in most dystopian films. No, but
So,
it's funny you should mention zombies, because the zombie movie craze was becoming really huge during that Saturn and Sagittarius. I mean, it's been going on since the 60s with, early
but
60s,
it
'90s.
had a resurgence.
Dead. But what's fascinating about it is that it is about seeing people as inhuman and feeding and predatory, and the heroes are the ones who haven't given into that tide of, so it can be projected, in as othering a human being, seeing them as, a predatory thing. And I think it's fascinating when it comes up and when it seizes the imagination, asking yourself how much othering is going on during that time culturally.
Yeah. Yeah, that harkens back to what you were saying before. So I think that ties it together really nicely. And so I hope that people can envision something beautiful. I mean, I started my channel during Neptune in Pisces and,
Neptune and Pisces brought a lot of beautiful things.
all the beautiful things.
I mean, and it still is bringing a lot of really, really beautiful things. That vision of a better world, a better planet, a better humanity, better all those things are really, really lovely and they're beautiful and they're good, but it's human nature to sort of focus on the darker and the lighter, just to sort of take the lighter for granted. And the light must never be taken for granted at all. We
There's
have
a lot of light out there. And that's the thing. It's like we can just keep getting scared and but it's not doing any good. There's something bigger at work, and so we have to take our part of it. Okay, so the final piece that we're going to talk about today is Uranus. This is the Uranus is going to be retrograde. It begins in September, right around the eclipses. Um,
Mhm.
and then it goes back into Taurus on November 9th.
Right.
So let's talk about Uranus coming from Gemini, where we have seen an acceleration of things, an interesting optimism, some new ideas coming forth, and going back and revisiting Taurus.
Yeah. That's Uranus and Taurus has been so fascinating to me because, everyone will automatically go and look at the last time that Uranus was in Taurus, and that's during the 1930s and rise of fascism and all these sorts of things, and that's what's going on now, and all of that. But what has kind of been fascinating about Uranus and Taurus is that Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. Okay, it's the first of the three modern planets discovered in 1781, the midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution. And so, what's fascinating about Uranus and Taurus is that it will bring revolution and change to whatever zodiac sign it's in. Okay. Taurus, we don't really see as a sign that's that interested in revolution and change. And if you've spoken to many people born under Taurus who have Taurus rising since 2018, they really weren't interested in the revolution and change that has taken place in their life. But it's an earth sign. And so it's going to make something of that revolution and change. You can't, if you've got a planet like Uranus coming through your zodiac sign, and it's going to be there for 7 years, it's not like a swimming pool where you take a deep breath, and try to swim the length of the pool underwater. Okay, that's not going to happen. You're not Shelley Winters in the Poseidon Adventure. Swimming underneath all, this isn't gonna, this is, you don't brace yourself for a planet that's going to be there for a long time. You're going to have to work with the planet at some period of time. And so Uranus in Taurus has really basically rocked the system. you know you know we were led to believe that there's like this one way that the system is going to work, and in 2018, until it left Gemini, that system got rocked. And we've learned a lot of things with this. One of the big things I think we've learned is that systems aren't necessarily stable and systems aren't forever. And even though part of us might be like, oh no, like for instance, the big thing right now is, democracy, it's under attack, type of thing. Um, well, the last time Uranus and Neptune were both in Gemini and Aries respectively was the Civil War. Okay. And that's America under attack. And everyone's like, okay, it's going to be civil war and a splitting of the. What people forget is what followed the Civil War. And what followed the Civil War is very intriguing. It was very much a mixed bag. But what it brought to the fore was what is, and I'm speaking in an American context here, but what is an American citizen? A freeman, which is what people who were slaves and now free were called freemen, are they American citizens or not? Okay. And the answer, of course, was yes, they are. And so the last time that you really questioned an identity, a political identity, was during that period of time. It's when Pluto is in Aquarius that we draft the Constitution and democracy becomes the new experiment. So So the things that are going on here is that no system is set. It can be rocked, and one of the things that's going on right now where everyone's like, oh my God, democracy is under attack. And there are things to really be very nervous and anxious about. But the big lesson that we're also learning is that it could have been changed earlier. That the pendulum doesn't have to move in one political direction. It can move in another political direction, or maybe it can get off the pendulum altogether, and you can change the society that you're living in. What we're learning right now, unprecedented has to be the most overused word right now. I mean, like nothing's unprecedented at this point. It's all unprecedented, but it shows you that this system could be rocked. This system could be changed and is being rocked and is being changed. And that doesn't necessarily mean a slide back down into pessimistic, apocalyptic, you know, fantasies or doom scrolling. What it can mean is like put yourself back in, I don't know, 1782, where people are like putting forth a nation that had never been done before. No one had done this before in Western civilization as people remember it, you know? And so maybe that's where we're at right now. And that's maybe, one of the great things was Uranus could go through Taurus, rock the system, and show that A, you get to the other side, but you can't go back to what you had before. And maybe that's the point, is to not go back to the pasture, to get out of the pasture and to, I don't know, roam free with other cattle. But no, but to get out of that, that these rules are not set in stone, that they can be rocked and they can be changed. And like anything, it can go towards something really beautiful or it could go towards something not. But a lot of times we can hide behind fear because it's convenient. We don't have to think beyond or imagine more, But then sometimes fear is the very thing that gets us to think beyond or to imagine more. It's what your relationship to your inner Saturn is going to be.
What strikes me about this time is how much resonance there is with big markers in American history. Like it's really interesting. I've got a video coming out where we look at the Civil War
Mhm.
astrology and how it parallels now. But also, like you said, the Revolutionary War, there's parallels. And
Well, in each of those cases, they begin when Uranus is at 9 degrees Gemini. There's the marker right there.
so
Um,
mark your calendars. Just kidding.
Mark
Um,
your calendars with your marker, but that's what LD Luke Dennis Broughton is the first one to notice that pattern. And then Hazel Rigg is the first 20th century astrologer to popularize that. And then Evangeline Adams makes it even. So the last times it's been at 9 degrees Gemini in recent history are world changing. It was at 9 degrees Gemini when you had the creation of NATO following World War II. 9 degrees Gemini when you have the Civil War. 9 degrees Gemini when America um, declares its independence from Britain. So these have been enormously changing the world you're living in events. And and it didn't all turn out badly. Some of it inspired some really great things and some extraordinary predicaments and dilemmas which have fired our imaginations and fired our moral conscience because time never stands still. It keeps going.
yeah. And so Uranus in Taurus, has had a lot of different things when it comes to our financial system. It has had things to do with climate change. But to your point, Taurus is stability and what we can count on. And whether that is the monetary system or anything that you've grown to feel provides you safety and security.
Mhm.
The fact that the weather that it's in December it's rainy or snowy and in the July it's sunny, right? Like there's been a change in everything that we've come to experience, and that has been fear inducing. And
Right.
what happens, to your point, is that is the precursor every time for Uranus going into Gemini, which is the new ideas, That is
Right.
the thing. We have to think differently because what we came to count on is no longer there. And another astrologer, Suzanne Sanders, she said in her most recent video, and I was like, I'm going to borrow this because I love it, that Gemini is a magician.
Mhm.
And it really, and you see this, and I see this with all of my Gemini people in my life, and you see it with the current president. They create their own reality. They have this ability to, tell these stories that becomes their story. They really believe it. And then that happens. Like, they can kind of chart a path in that way through their storytelling. And I do believe that this dip back into Taurus will remind us of what we've lost and what's been at stake, but prepare us for how we want our new ideas to come forth.
Right. But remember that Uranus is a wheel. It's the only planet that orbits the sun on its side. Okay. In other words, its north and south poles are where everyone else's equators are.
Okay.
And it's even got rings. So it literally looks like a wheel in the sky that keeps on turning. Okay. It's like that's what Uranus, it's unique as a planetary ruler and it's unique as a planet in its appearance. So Uranus also is about what's gone around once comes around again. Okay. And indeed, revolution, before it was applied to the idea of overthrowing governments, was originally, its older meaning was an astronomical term as an orbit. A planet has completed a revolution around the sun. It's completed an orbit. So it's coming back around to where you were before. Okay, so, the tech bros, for instance, are no different than a Prometheus. Okay, it's the same story, playing with fire and not taking into account the consequences of it, or what's going to follow. And, fire was something that allowed civilization to take place, but then fire is also something that's turned into a weapon, to destroy. So we've come back to this predicament. And the relationship to predicaments and dilemmas as framed by Saturn, you're not supposed to solve the predicament or solve the dilemma. You're supposed to sit in it and understand it, to absorb it and let it open up your horizons. Let it affect and change your thinking. Just because we come back to where we began doesn't mean it's the same time. It's like you never step into a river twice, which I think is an ancient I think it's an ancient Asian or Buddha idea or Persian. It's one of the two, but no, it's Greek, I think. But you never step because the water's so not to get all whatever. But what I'm saying is that we face our time in the time that we're living in. So this idea of advance and progress, it can be there, but it's always going to be a double-edged sword. And so Uranus can introduce new ideas, but are we ready for them? You know, yeah. Are we ready for them? Do we understand them? Just because a new idea has been introduced doesn't mean that everyone understands it.
So Heather, so someone commented on one of my videos. Yeah, I read all of your comments and I always try to respond when I can. But someone had commented that the North won the Civil War, but then they didn't. Like, that then they ceded so much territory for the sake of giving up the union or for keeping the union together. That really goes to your point that you can introduce a new idea and it can bring forth some degree of progress, but can everyone really integrate it? Can they understand it? Can they
And
will
do they do it at the same time?
Mhm.
They do it at different times or it comes from different places. But, remember that Gemini is sibling rivalry. So this is going back to Cain and Abel, and and if you ever read the book of Genesis, it's nothing but sibling rivalry from beginning to end. It starts with Cain and Abel, and it ends with Joseph and his brothers. Okay, it's nothing but sibling rivalry. One trying to get a hold of the other. I mean, Jacob and Esau battle for who's going to be born first in the womb, and so this idea of left versus right, we're back here again, of just this sibling rivalry, and it's something to really keep an eye on. What did they call it? The not the bipolar mind, but the binary thinking, which became much more, common usage in the last 12-ish years or whatever. Like, the either or, and either or can be false. And
Yes.
so, and
Yes.
so that's something to also keep in mind. But Uranus and Gemini, new ideas was wonderful, but it's also bringing in, you know, are you going to redistrict? Then we're going to redistrict, and it's like, are we really back in the kindergarten playground?
Yes.
And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. Like maybe we never left it. Maybe we've come full circle.
There's the Uranus. I
It's
appreciate that
Uranus.
perspective. As an only child, I don't understand people with siblings. So, you know,
But you
um,
had friends when you were a child, right?
yes, I mean, I totally am a part of the issues that are going on in the world, just like every other person. I contribute my energy. Um,
Right.
but I was just, thinking that that is where we're at right now. Yeah, there's definitely, and as Uranus goes back into Gemini, there will be more of like another bifurcation.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so, but hopefully we can all kind of just do our best in our own personal lives with this energy.
Well,
And
it is already transforming us as a society. What I think everyone's aghast at is that the answers aren't what we thought they were going to be. No one's got the answers. It really is a radical free element here, or a ball and play, as they say. It really is, where is it going to go? Because we don't have the answers. We can't go back, and we don't know what the future looks like. And so the typical reaction is to kind of freeze in your tracks. But remember that dilemmas and predicaments open the imagination. They
I'm
get
seeing in my own
you.
life and other people's lives, though, like I'm seeing the evolution this year in how so many of us are accepting that, oh, we don't know what's going to happen. I, for one, definitely have always been somebody who, like, I can, predict this, or I think that's going to happen, or I always have an opinion, right? I agree with you. And maybe there is something very sacred about that, where it really does bring you back to a place of not, like the tarot card, the hanged man, the nothingness. Like you just have to, like you said, just sort of sit with it. And that's where we open our hearts, we open to new experiences within our own lives. And I see people getting overwhelmed that they can't do more on a bigger scale. And I think that's it. Like, know what you're called to do, and know that we're going back and we're having this revisiting. And so I think all of your beautiful analogies and stories about the the planets going back into these signs that we had thought we had said goodbye to are another opportunity for us to kind of do it differently, knowing that the world is unknown and vast before us.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, whenever we're making big changes in our life, it can be a breakup or you're departing into a different direction or whatever, you come back home again. You come back and touch base with, even if you're breaking up with someone, you still get together afterwards just to sort of see if that was the right, there's always a sort of touch base. And that's actually a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
The going back to touch base. It's actually a beautiful thing. We're we're not creatures of like, oh, I'm done with it and I'm moving forward. It's just no, everyone moves back and touches base, and maybe there's something that you mourn, or maybe there's something that you take from that and treasure and move forward with it. Or maybe going back and touching base turns into a reunion, and that's a good thing. So retrogrades are really, really beautiful. Um, I think they're really beautiful time passages.
Thank you for giving us a lot of clarity on what feels to me like sometimes a little murky and unclear. So I'm taking away a lot from this, and I hope other people are as well. I do have to do a quick plug for my Chiron workshop. So I think this is a beautiful time for us to revisit our past and to revisit places that we may have been hurt as younger people, as children or young adults. And what was the meaning of that? What was the gift that we can bring out of that to give to other people? And that's really what the workshop is going to investigate, is our own individual purpose through wisdom that we gain through pain. And so it seems like an opportune time to do that. So that's September 20th, and that information will be below too. So as always, it's such a joy to have you. Thank you for
Love
making
that you're doing a Chiron workshop, by the way. I really,
What'd you
really,
say?
I love that you're doing a Chiron workshop. I think it's
Thank you.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to do as many people's individual placements as possible, because
Mhm.
to your point, people will put stuff in the comments, and I can't do like a reading for everybody in the comments. But
Right.
I'm going to like give you all everything I've got for a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, and I'm going to really try and give you any sort of meaning that I can extrapolate from the stars that you can go and extrapolate more from.
Sounds wonderful.
Thank you. And I'm thinking about joining your salon. It's not the money, it's just a time thing, but I've already learned so much again from you, and I want to keep learning from you. So,
Oh, you're so sweet. You're so sweet.
well, I hope you realize how sincere it is. So, um,
And I hope you realize that even if you join the live and don't see it, you can watch it on the replay.
yes, because I can do it while I'm making dinner or something. I mean, unfortunately, the reality of the life these days is like,
Honey, that's it's all designed
right,
that you can listen while making dinner
right,
or picking up kids. I can't tell you how many people listen doing that,
right. Exactly. That's the way we kind of have to do it. And that's, better than me like obsessing over political stuff that I can't do anything about right now. So, okay, blah, blah, blah. Thank you for coming. I mean this sincerely. Thank you all for commenting, sharing, liking, subscribing. Please go check out Christopher's channel if you're new to him. And yeah, there's a reason and a season for it all, and the universe is conspiring to help us. So take it to heart, and until next time.